Hola a todos, me llamo Marcos, un estudiante de español en la universidad. And in this video, I'm going to talk through Ocho Apellidos Vascos, the film for A-level Spanish, and talk through context, themes, characters, and key quotes allowing you to succeed in analyzing this film for A-level. Vamos. Entonces, para empezar. Ocho Apellidos Vascos es una película comedia romántica que se basa principalmente en los estereotipos percibidos hacia las diferentes regiones en la España de hoy. Interestingly, the film became the highest grossing Spanish film of all time, even surpassing Titanic. With its release in 2014, it has a gross revenue of over 77 million euros alone in Spain. And it held the #1 spot at the Spanish box office for several weeks after release. It's clear that the director, important to note, Emilio Martínez Lázaro from Madrid, pokes fun at stereotypes throughout the film through humour and comedy. However, I would argue that there is a more political and interestingly important message in the film, that of love, friendship, and the importance of coexisting in harmony in a divided society, which we see throughout the film. The film poster here, la portada de la película, also sort of links to thematic ideas in the film too, which I've analysed on this slide, as you can see. So overall, I will now give a general summary of the plot in the film. So the film follows Rafa, a proud Andalusian man from Seville who never has left his region, and he has the stereotypical sort of traits that embody that sort of southern Spanish man. He's flamboyant, he's quite outgoing, he doesn't really care about he's quite sort of superficial. He doesn't really care about hurting other people's feelings. As we see with Amaia, he's obsessed with appearances, flamenco, bullfighting, Real Betis. As we see in the bar Muelles at the start of the film, there's sort of banderas, flags throughout the bar that they work in. Joaquín, Curro, his two camarero friends, waiters, and Rafa himself. It's completely submerged in this sort of Andalusian heritage and sort of pride. Rafa falls for Amaia. She presents herself, and the film and the director presents herself very well as a tough and independent Basque woman. Think about it at the start of the film when we're introduced to her, her back is facing the camera. So that already creates this sort of cold, very brutal, very Basque sort of introduction to the character. She's in Seville, she's in this bar after breaking up and being jolted from her husband to be Anchon. Anchon is an important name throughout the film. After a brief encounter, which turns into a sort of a satirical comedy, farcical almost, Amaia returns to her hometown in the Basque Country after spending the night with Rafa. But Rafa, smitten and sort of saying "Estoy enamorado hasta las trancas," believes that he's completely fallen in love with her after even spending one night with her. He's smitten, and after she leaves her bag, an sort of important sort of symbol of her Basque sort of heritage and her Basqueness, she's left her bag in Seville, and Rafa takes this bag and uses this as his propeller to go up to the Basque Country, Argoitia, where she lives. Once in the Basque Country, Rafa must pretend to be a Basque, as when Koldo, Amaia's father, randomly notices that he's missed a call from Amaia after so many years that they haven't spoken. He thinks, wow, this must be something really important that I've missed, that I haven't, like there's a reason why she's calling me after this long amount of time. So Rafa has to act out to be Anchon, and that's the whole sort of plot twist. Despite not knowing anything about the culture in the Basque Country, in Escaudi, that's Basque Country in Basque itself, Rafa has to pretend to be Anchon to gain the approval, principally, of Amaia's father, Koldo. For example, he adopts 8 stereotypical Basque surnames, which is where the film's title comes from, Ocho Apellidos Vascos. Translated in English, 8 Basque surnames, but it will be sort of traditionally translated as the Spanish affair. Many comic scenes occur whilst Rafa, comedically playing this role of Anchon, tries to not only win over Amaia, on top of that, also Koldo, and this sort of deception that he plays between actually acting as Anchon turns into a true love, we could argue. So the conclusive message of the film is, as Amaia deeply falls in love with him, and she realizes this sort of faked act isn't really true. Isn't false, and she falls in love with him. She travels to Seville, and the roles are reversed. She becomes el otero, the sort of corny person, and I'll analyze this sort of quote el otero later. So the conclusive message of the film is that love can conquer all cultural, political, and ideological barriers, despite where we are from. And the most opposing in Spain would be that of the north in the Basque Country, and that of Seville in the south of Spain. And it's interesting to note, as an English audience, which we'd more stereotypically align with the Spain that we know, and maybe it's a comment on Emilio Martinez Lazaro's point of view of the need to create this harmony between the independentist regions in Spain, that of the Basque Country with ETA, and Catalonia, for example, and those of Spain, so that of Andalusia, Madrid, for example. So trying to create harmony between those independentists as well as more culturally typically Spanish aligned, regions that we align with our sort of prejudices and how we sort of view onto Spain as an audience. So through creating this conquering of cultural and political barriers through love, the director plays with sort of stereotypes in a very comedic way to use humor and misunderstandings to conquer this obstacle. Así que en este video yo voy a hablar del contexto, de los temas, los personajes, también las técnicas del director, las citas claves y también preguntas del examen, which will all be linked to Ocho Apellidos Vascos. Vale. The context and background knowledge of Spain in the present day is important when analysing Ocho Apellidos Vascos, and this is what I'm going to do on this slide. So, first off, Spain is divided politically into 19 different autonomous communities, 17 in sort of the peninsula in Spain, and also the Balearic Islands and the Canary Islands, but then also the 2 cities in the north of Spain called Ceuta and Melilla. And in the film, this sort of idea of communities, difference, cultures is really mixed. So first off, Andalucía, at the top here, es una comunidad autónoma muy grande con mucha historia, situada en el sur, influenciada por las culturas árabe y mediterránea y orgullosa, de su lugar en el balneario. So, Andalusia, with its Moorish heritage, that of the Moors from 711 to 1492, Andalusia in the south is the region here in which the Moors from the north of Africa, principally in Morocco, and other Arabic countries could easily invade. And this is where this sort of architectural history and real display of architecture has been left. For example, this isn't stereotypically in the sort of architecture of this, but this is La Plaza de España with a flamenco dancer. Um, and this sort of idea of the South being very architecturally beautiful with beautiful people and is very proud of its history is also important. So in the film, at the start of the film, it's important to note that when we are introduced to it, we're introduced to a very stereotypically beautiful part of Spain, that of Seville, in the Rio Guadalquivir, the river Guadalquivir, and with La Giralda, La Catedral de Sevilla, and also with fuegos artificiales, with fireworks blowing up in the air. So this idea of Andalusia, of Spain being very beautiful, very celebratory, always on a banda de vagos, lazy, as Amaia calls them, but then also solamente os levantáis para ir de siesta, de juerga, sorry. And that's a quote that I will analyze later. So this idea that they only get up to have parties is also stereotypically aligned with this. So Andalusia in the south, very hot culture, very hot temperature, which translates into its culture of very very warm, very friendly people, is starkly contrast to El País Vasco, El Escaudi in the north with a very cold climate, matching that with its very cold people. As I've noted, the first interaction between Amaia and Koldo is very important as they're very cold to each other. You wouldn't have thought they were father and daughter. They stood meters apart when they haven't met up for over, I think it's 6 years, for a very long time. So it translates into that sort of sense. So El País Vasco, o Escaudi, abarca una zona geográfica mucho más pequeña y aislada que Andalucía, en el norte, con su propio idioma, and that sort of ideas are important, they're very proud of that heritage, y costumbres distintas y a menudo caracterizada por tener una perspectiva ferozmente separatista. This idea of separatist is very important. ETA, ETA, is a very important aspect in the film. It was a separatist group, and I suggest that you research into this if you study this film, which is known for its Calle Barrocas. Calle Barroca is were the sort of street raids that they would do to protest manifestaciones in order to claim their independence, to fight for that. And we see that played out sort of satirically, very comedically in the film. So they've got this very independentist idea, separatist, which they try to separate from the mainland Spain of Andalusia. So Andalusia very warm, very Spanish, compared to El País Vasco, which is very separatist, which is trying to separate from this. Vale. Now I'm going to talk about Andalusia particularly. So the characters from Andalusia in the film of note are Rafa, his two camarero friends, which are Joaquín and Curro, and then not specifically from Andalusia, but from Extremadura, Cáceres, with an interest in Andalusia is Merche, which I will talk about characters later in the film, but those are the important characters of note which link to these regions. So, la Comunidad Autónoma Andalucía es ciertamente una de las regiones de España más conocidas en el extranjero, as I've spoken about, stereotypically aligning with what we'd class with Spain. Very flamboyant, flamenco, bullfighting, very beautiful with its architecture. For example, Sevilla tiene un color especial. It's a sort of song which keeps on popping up as a sort of a motif throughout the film. And this is the introduction to the film that we see is in Sevilla. So with its sol, sun, el buen tiempo, really good weather, las tapas, la siesta, el flamenco, y una cierta actitud relajada ante el trabajo. Vagos, as Amaia called it, lazy layabouts, son algunas de las ideas justificadas o no que se atribuyen a esta región. And the way that they talk is also important as well. So there's this idea of ceceo, ceceo, which is sort of how the like typically Spanish people from Madrid or Salamanca or areas that are in the center or not in the south basically or in Latin America will say C's as th, whereas in the south in Andalusia they would say Andalusia as I've just said rather than Andalusia. So the way that they talk also is exaggerated in the film as they talk just with this purely very stereotypically Andalusian accent that's so exaggerated. Um, so this creates a linguistic difference between Andalusia or Andalusia, as they would say in Seville, and the Basque Country. Very touristic and iconic with its landmarks. And Seville is a very big trope of this. Has an importance of coexistence between different cultures. For example, fenicios, romanos, Romans, árabes, judíos y cristianos han pasado por esta parte del país. So you could argue that historically this place has had a real mixture of different cultures, and Emilio Martínez Lasro, the director, or las guionistas, the script writers, are trying to rewrite history, are trying to create this pattern of using Andalusia as a place of coexistence, just like in the medieval ages. They're trying to create this harmony, and this is done through love. Andalusia is a lot less industrialized and is a lot poorer than the north, which is more industrial, especially in Bilbao, which I will go into a minute to talk about. So yeah, it's a very poor region typically that relies on tourism, very important with agriculture, and el desempleo juvenil, which you'll study in A level in your paper one if you do AQA, is very high. Andalusia is the area in Spain with the highest amount of youth unemployment. Vale. Ahora voy a hablar sobre el País Vasco, el Euskadi, que es muy diferente políticamente y históricamente y culturalmente a la Andalucía. So the Basque Country in the north of Spain with its very different climate, and when we're introduced to the Basque Country very almost like very farcically, Rafa is traveling on the coach to El Escalde, and he experiences una tormenta, a storm, which is in una pesadilla, a nightmare. And when traveling, he he just sees this place as its stereotype. So he sees it as very cold, but with awful weather, raining all the time. Just it's just a nightmare basically. And this is just not the case. There's elevated, really tense music. The La Banda Sonora, the sort of soundtrack, becomes very tense with its strings playing. And matching his sort of anxiety in entering this region. But in fact, when actually entering the region, it's all very beautiful, and the music settles out after this nightmare. And in fact, it's a very green area, very industrial, and we enter the port town, the fictional port town of Argoitia, where Amaia's from. Very green, very peaceful, a lot more similar to the UK or England that we are used to in as viewers available. Um, it's a lot more industrial, a lot more work-minded, as you see with Koldo, who's a pescador, a sort of fisherman. He represents the traditional Basque man, just as Rafa, the very lazy, very superficial, the very humorous, not really caring much, and civilian man. He represents the the emblem of that, just in the same way Koldo does with El País Vasco. Just with El Betis in Seville as an important football club, El Athletic del Bilbao is also an important football club. And there are references to football in the film. Vale, voy a hablar de los rasgos, the characteristics regionales y nacionales in the film. In this sort of thematic, talking about stereotypes, sort of love, humor, as Ocho Apellidos principally plays with regional characteristics from the north and south. So the first moment that Rafa arrives in the city of Argotia, as I've mentioned, it is notably different to Andalusia. So this sort of landscape is an important aspect, in contrast with Seville with its Moorish architecture. Also, the linguistic differences play a part in that too. So the differences sort of socially are there. Also, the characters fit into these stereotypes, as I mentioned. Each person almost plays a region or represents a region of Spain. Secutor, by the way, is gang. So Rafa and his gang of friends are the typical Andalusian men. Son chicos jóvenes, elocuentes, graciosos, que hablan rápido y cuentan chistes a cada minuto. So they're just jokers. Bromas and chistes, by the way, are synonyms that you can use. Visualmente, la caracterización andaluza, masculina en este caso, pasa por llevar camisas. So if we look at the vestuario, what they wear, it's important. So they wear shirts, polos, chinos, el pelo engominado. So with gomina, which is gel in the hair, hacia atrás y barba de 3 días. So this is very important, their appearance. And this contrasts with the very, like, el flequillo, which is the, oh my gosh, it's the fringe, that's the word, the fringe of Amaia. So, and also thinking about the accents of the north, and the words that they use, aita, amma, mum and dad and mother, are also linguistically different. Whereas Merche is an important character. She almost like blends these two. She's experienced what Rafa's experienced. She found a love in Argoitia, just like Rafa, but she's from the south. And we see this played out at the end of the film when Koldo wakes up in her bed with her, as they almost have just a very similar storyline to Rafa and Amaia. And he wakes up to notice Guardia Civil sort of statues and emblems in her bedroom, that of her late husband. So there's a subplot there that's also quite important. Despite these characteristics that are regional and national, they blend, and love is able to do this. Through love, geographical and sort of weather-like differences are able to blend through love, and this is the principal message of the film. So now I will talk about love, that really important aspect that's able to defy the regional differences between Amaia, Rafa, but also Koldo and Merche. So you can't deny that Ocho Apellidos Vascos is very much similar to Romeo and Juliet, even that of Gavin and Stacey, even in the UK. So those are the two which you could align with this sort of, despite being from different regions, they're able to conquer that through love. Ese amor es un amor imposible, con todo en contra, una aventura loca con final feliz. As we know throughout the film, what's going to be the end result. You could argue why watch the film if you know exactly what's going to happen, but watching it is interesting, it's funny, it's comedic, especially for a Spanish audience, playing with those sort of stereotypes that the audience themselves will align with and be laughing, but then realize, oh, I do actually have these sort of perceived stereotypes as well. I hold on to these too. So really inviting the audience and really honing in this importance of love that's able to do this. En la película, el estilo dramático es reconvertido en historia del humor. Tras muchas aventuras, el amor gana y reúne al chico y la chica, as I've mentioned. So, it's through this love that you could argue was escondido, was hidden at the start. It was fake. It wasn't really there, especially for Amaia. But Rafa, who was so open with his emotions, who was really fighting for that from the start, declaring estoy enamorado hasta las trancas even. He's head over heels in love with her. He's open with that from the start, and he's able to see sort of the end result that we sort of align with. We want them to, even despite Amaia being cold, we want them to achieve that end result of being love. So it's a fun film in that sense. And you could argue, what's the point of watching if we know what's going to happen? But it's the playing out of that through love that makes it interesting. Vale. I'll now talk about humor. So I would argue humor as a concept in the film is effectively used by the director in order to invite the audience into the film's message and its objective too. That principally of the ridiculous nature of holding prejudices towards regions which are unknown, which have been unencountered. And those that encountering in the film, which Rafa does, despite the fact that he's never left Andalusia, he does that. He comes out of his region. He goes and experiences what life really is like, not what it's perceived to be like. And he like sees it as true, and he's able to live out. The realization of that will sort of allow audiences to see the ridiculousness of these stereotypes that they hold, reflecting their own opinions. So humor is the principal like idea of this film, and it's what Spanish audiences particularly will love watching this film for. It's funny, it's relatable, it's very down to earth, and it's tackling those themes that are quite political, which are quite difficult, but in a very, very funny and very humorous and easy way of doing it. The director isn't too harsh with it, but he's also very effective in doing so. Um, so the main one is that of Rafa acting out as Anshon, both as a person, like hypothetically, but also physically as he adopts the dress of sort of what Anshon would wear. He wears like an earring. He has very like brutish hair. He takes off his gomina, his gel. He wears like very scraggy, not very flamboyant clothes, and this basically allows the philosophy, la filosofía, the attitude of Rafa to change as he experiences this, and he becomes this really outward thinking person through seeing the perspective of the Basques. Um, and I will talk about specific references and quotes to humor later on in this video. De hecho, esta película fue muy valiente al ser una de las primeras veces que se pueden ver y oír bromas sobre ETA y la violencia en el País Vasco. As I've mentioned, the humoristic and really farcical Calle Barroca, so street manifestation, street protest, sorry, manifestación in Spanish, is an example of this. Estoy a punto de convertirme en el nuevo líder andaluz de la Calle Barroca, as Rafa says when doing this, and he finds his friends in the jail after setting something alight and then putting it into a bin. Well, his cigarette goes alight and he throws it into a bin, and then that sets it alight. That is another ETA reference, which is he's so just unaware of. Then he ends up in the jail, and then he attends the Calle Barroca with Amaia's father Koldo spectating this as well. So this exaggerated stereotypes are really what plays with the film so well, and what it achieves the message so well. Sorry. Vale. Ahora yo voy a hablar de personajes en la película, and I will talk about Rafa first. So I've got text here, but I'm going to talk about the three sort of images on the screen that are three important, I would say, moments in the film that reflect Rafa's progression. I would argue he has the biggest progression in the film to become, and he is really, we like him. He's a very likable, very amicable character, and we want him to succeed. And through doing so, he undergoes a real transformation almost into becoming very, at the start, inward thinking, very simple-minded Andalusian into a very open-minded, worldly man. So I will first talk about this image. So this is an example of primer plano. We're able to see, well, actually medio plano, and then it moves into primer plano as it focuses on his declaration of love for Amaia. This is very early on in the film. What he's wearing is also very important. He's in a polo with, if you can see here, a toro, a bull, which is obviously a very important stereotypical image of Spain, on his camiseta, on his shirt. He looks worried. He's open in his emotions. He leaves it on a plate almost, like he doesn't hide his emotions at all. Whereas Koldo and Amaia, as we notice, do so. So there are negatives and positives for both regions. Rafa, although he's very superficial, he's also very emotionally open, and that's also a very attractive feature of him. That is very different to characters in the Basque Country who need to learn from him, and they do. So it's not all negative in Andalusia and all positive in the Basque Country. There are sort of nuances to both. So yeah, he declares his love in this, and the importance of the black screen around it also highlights our focus on him, on his emotions. He looks serious. He's changed, or he's going to change, due to Amaia. Yes. Then we move on to him on the bus, el autobús, on the coach, traveling to the Basque Country. He's reading El Euskera sin miedo. This idea of miedo is important. He travels to the Basque Country, and he's really scared, as I've mentioned, with having this nightmare. The sign saying "Bienvenido el País Vasco," but he doesn't feel welcome. He feels a foreigner. He feels out, like not very welcome, and he has miedo. He has complete fear. So reading this tries to humble this, tries to get rid of this fear, but in reality, it's all that's there. He looks very shocked and looks very surprised at really what he's encountering of the cultural and linguistic information surrounding the Basque Country when reading this book. On this bus, that's where he finds Merche, and she can immediately identify him as an outsider when he has Sevilla tiene un color especial playing as his ringtone on the bus. And then now let's move to this. As I've referenced in the previous slide, this is when Rafa accidentally sets a cigarette alight and throws it into this bin. This was, and yeah, stereotypically is associated with the raids and the protests, as we see in the Calle Barroca, but also historically, for ETA. ETA sort of terminated in 2011 with its killings officially, and there has been none since, as it's no longer really making moves to try and become independent. So this is a sort of a stereotypical image of this, and Rafa is unaware of this as he accidentally throws his cigarette into the sort of bin. Also, this dress that he's wearing is also very important, sort of very flamboyant as well. And on this screen, I've left some information about Rafa and about his journey. We do really align with him, and we want him to do well in winning over his love. And the way that he does this is very comedic. Vale, ahora yo voy a hablar de Amaia. Amaia, at first view, is a very brutal, very harsh, a very stubborn, and a very, fuerte character. She's not very approachable. She's very cold. As I mentioned previously, the first impression that we get of her is in this traje de flamenco dress, looking very fed up. She's in this bar Muelles where Rafa works with other tourists, also important to notice, with its azulejos, tiles, and Real Betis sort of banderas, as well as just being the stereotypical location associated with tapas and bars in the south of Spain. So yes, her back is the first thing we see, su espalda. An important expression to note, I would say, is dar la espalda, to turn your back on, to ignore, or and that is basically what she does from the start. She's ignoring the camera, as if she didn't want to be there. And with her friends, after being jolted from her ex or her husband to be, or now her ex, Anshon, she's fed up, and she doesn't really want to be there. Out of all the places in the world, she'd at least want to be in Sevilla. So yeah, that's the first impression we have of her. She's wearing a flamenco dress with sort of flequillos. She's got a rose or flower on her head as well. This is all very stereotypically associated with Andalusian dress for women that we see in La Feria de Sevilla, or other sort of festivals in Seville too. And then on the contrary, when analyzing this other image, here she's in her wedding dress, su traje de matrimonio, de boda. And this is after Rafa is trying to escape for the second time, as we know. Um, and she's noted that he's run off. She's told Merchin Koldo to get out of her room whilst wearing her dress, as she notices that Rafa has left. So she runs in this wedding dress, going down this sort of pipe, and she's running really fast. And it's really hilarious, really. And then before he gets onto the bus, she throws herself on him. She jumps fully on him, and then he's basically physically unable to move. And then, as I've mentioned, just similar to the first instance when they kiss and then that ignites their love. Each sequence when Rafa tries to leave, and Maya goes like running for him, and then they kiss, and that's what's able to keep him back with her. So it's this instance of love as a recurring sort of motif that's able to sort of bring the two together as a couple. Um, and also the relationship that she has with Koldo, her father, also improves. At the start of the film, it's very cold, and by the end, they're hugging each other. She's crying with him, and he really realizes that she has fallen in love. And despite the fact that they'll be supporting a different football team, she really loves him, and that's the main thing that matters. So not only is there a development, sort of a transformation in the relationship between Amaia and Rafa, there also is between Amaia and Koldo. Yeah. Now I'm going to talk about Koldo. Koldo, un pescador de Argutia en el País Vasco, es estereotípicamente asociado con el hombre idealista de esta región. So, as with the others characters, I've got images, and then if you look on the screen with the text boxes, I recommend that you write some annotations if you print off the slides, and then create more notes around it on top of the information that I'm giving. So first off, I would say Koldo, when we first meet him with Amaia, is, as I said, just idealistically so Basque. You couldn't you couldn't be any more Basque than him. He is de pura cepa Basque. De pura cepa is a really nice phrase. It means through and through. De pura, P-U-R-A, cepa, C-E-P-A. De pura cepa. Vasco. That's what he is. And we notice that just in a similar way that Rafa is de pura cepa andaluz. So those two are very similar in their sense of being extremely from their regions, and you couldn't really find a character that isn't more like the characters. So I would first talk about this image. This image is in the it's a very funny sequence when Rafa, dressing as Anchon, is meeting Koldo for the first time. He's frightened, he's terrified of him. Koldo is very brutish, very, very Basque. He's like, for example, Rafa orders just some tapas, just some light food. Where, by the way, pinchos is the equivalent of tapas in the north. Whereas Koldo is like, oh, why just this? This is a set menu, so everything that's on the menu is for them, and you can't really order. It's all there, and this highlights this difference between like this gastronomical difference. In the south, it's very easy eating, like tapas. You can eat it here and there. It's very social. Whereas in the north, they take it very seriously. It's very well known for its, especially fish. Like pescado, it's like fish-based diet and gastronomy. So this is in the restaurant, and the jokes between the two are very revealing. It's very ironic. A lot of the references he makes, and this scene I think is very important, both gastronomically and the development between the two characters. If you look at Rafa as well, he looks like a Basque man. Yes. And this scene here is when Koldo, very funny, I think Koldo has the funniest sort of sequences in the film. His Sevilla tiene un color especial, las sevillanas, on the ringtone, which is coming from Rafa's phone. And he, by the way, Rafa's phone case is in green and white, which is, again, the bandera andaluza, the Andalusian sort of flag. And he hears this, and he's like, "Oh, I swear I can hear I can hear some sevillanas. I don't know what this sound is. And Amaia tries to talk over it, as does Merche, because she's in on this sort of deception too, as does Rafa. But with the awkward silences, he hears it. And then running up in, this is in um his house, by the way. Um, this is a very humoristic, but Rafa gets the phone, his own phone, and throws it, launches it right outside of the house through the window and smashes the window, just for the fear of Koldo finding it's his phone and finding that out. But in reality, Amaia just lies and says that it was her mother's partner, who's also a civilian. So this idea of Amaia, her mother, also being attracted to a civilian man, it's in their blood. And this is a quote which I'll refer to later. This idea of it being en los genes. Now I will talk about probably the most interesting character in the film. She's the most adaptable. She's also the most just worldly, the most caring, and also the most likable, I would argue, after Rafa maybe. Um, Merche es una señora divertida, alocada, pero también cercana y cariñosa. Todo el mundo querría como madre, tía o vecina. She's such a mother figure. Um, and as I've mentioned previously, her late husband, who was in the Guardia Civil, despite being from the Basque Country, by the way, he served the Spanish National Police, La Guardia Civil. So it's this idea of her being able to introduce to him aspects that would be so unheard of for Koldo. He would never ever ever think of being part of a Guardia Civil. He'd want to be in the Basque police force. Um, so the fact that she was able to introduce to a Basque man the Guardia Civil, or she was able to sort of mix those cultures, I think is also very important. She acts as a mother figure to Rafa. She's able to act in this way. She's also able to act as Ane Igaboriturro, the Spanish, or the Basque specifically, um, television presenter, sorry, who, and she adopts her name, Annie, which is a joke, and it's just this idea that Merche is very adaptable. She's very easy to sort of act her way through characters and everything. So she's from Cáceres, which is in Extremadura, which is in the south west of Spain, which is very near and very culturally sort of equivalent to Andalusia. So she holds a lot of similarities to Rafa, and that's what really allows them to become quite close as well. So I'd say her relationship with Rafa is very important. And as I say, if you read the information, I've spoken about how they meet and how their sort of development sort of happens. And also the sort of loving relationship between Rafa and between Merche and Koldo is also important. Um, the real fact that opposites can attract despite their cultural differences. Yes. So now I will talk about Joaquín y Curro as the characters. They're basically el séquito, los amigos sevillanos de Rafa, and they represent the real I sort of stereotypically idealistic civilian men. They work as camareros, and they're very proud of their heritage. They've been friends with him for a very long time. They speak in Ceseo, sorry. They're very flamboyant, very dramatic, very open with their emotions, and they just so for example, when encountering the bag of Amaia, they both act so irrationally and so like hilariously. They think that it'll have a bomb inside when Amaia leaves her bag and Rafa takes it to the bar to look through it and to find her phone. And they notice that there's ni mascara, ni rimel, sorry, no mascara. There's nothing really beautiful about this woman through her bag, and they make fun of her in a very humorous way, but also deeply quite troublesome because they don't really understand her. They think that everything associated with the past people is to do with bombs and to do with ETA and separatist groups. So I think these two characters are very important. They also notice a change in the philosophy of Rafa by the end of the film. And this highlights their lack of change, their lack of sort of movement. They're very stuck in civil, and they're what Rafa was right at the start, and they haven't really changed. So it's really the end of the film with that is saying to the audience, well, you're just like these two. Now what are you going to do in order to change this? So now I'm going to talk about some of the techniques of the director. Firstly, about sort of romantic comedy as like the genre of the film and its cliche. So as I've mentioned, the plot of the film is very important to know, and I suggest that you memorize it or you learn it off or you know the sequences. Um, but it fits into that traditional trope of sort of the romantic comedy. It's this it's this hopeful lover from the south that falls in love with this like impossible love that like lover, sorry, Amaia. Like it would never really happen, but we want it to, and we know it will, despite what's going to happen. And yeah, I think we all know from the start of the film how it's going to pan out, and it makes it so entertaining. So now I'll talk about farce and satirical comedy itself. It's important to note sort of the very Spanish references that are jokes. For example, El Comando G, that comes in the scene when Rafa, before the Calle Barroca, goes into the jail cell and he meets these like criminals who are like Basque independents, and they ask him from what like commando are you? So what band like group are you from? Where are you from basically? And he says Comando G. Um, Ironically, if if you didn't know what it was, it was an animation show. Comando G was like an animated TV children's TV program. So this is just completely far from um the Comando G that he really says he's from Gisbagua, which is in the Basque Country. So it's this sort of like ironic play that goes on. Um, so yeah, and it's this idea of him trying to really try to create this new personality. He's really trying to deceive, or not deceive even. He's trying to win over Koldo, and he just tries all of this really like he tries too hard almost to become like it, and it's yeah, it's just ironic. Um, and the way that he interacts, Rafa, with the Basque Country is very ironic. He's very unaware of his surroundings. He, as in the nightmare. So, as I referenced points throughout this video, the satirical comedy and farce is very important concept, basically that of humor. Um, through the sort of regional stereotypes, how Rafa and how Amaia plays onto them, the jokes, calling Amaia calling the Basque pandas de Vago, solo os lamentáis para irse de huelga, calling them like levaos. And in fact, they kind of are. They only care about appearances and they're superficial. So it's through these jokes um, and these encounters between the two different regions um, that the director is successful in creating this. So when analyzing any film, it's important to note cinematography. And I will talk through some examples that are important in sort of enhancing your analysis of Ocho Apellidos Vascos and can help just improve those answers rather than just thematically analyzing the film because there are clear themes, but also how to enhance it and what the director uses to play out these through cinematography. So, for example, el bar flamenco Los Muelles está lleno de colores vivos y diseños, algunos llamativos, como el vestuario y el maquillaje de los bailarines. There's azulejos estampados de las paredes. There's also Real Betis flags around. So this creates automatically a scene which is very civilian. Also, before this, briefly, we've got the Rio Guadalquivir. There's el plan conjunto or el plan gran plan, no, sorry, el gran plano at the start of the film in Seville, which pays homage, rinde homenaje in Spanish, to the history of Andalusia with its Arab influence. We enter in a very beautiful way, also with the fireworks. This contrasts with the countryside with the plan general of the Basque country, and there's just fade, by the way, to contrast the pesadilla to this when entering. There's a fade used to create like harmony. It's a harmonious space. It isn't as bad as the pesadilla will indicate. So so through cinematography, viewers of the film are introduced to sort of the Spain that they're very would imagine with Seville, and then the wide shots of the Basque Country and also in Seville, sorry, introduce us to this space to create the backgrounds to all of this action. As Rafa travels to the bus, there's quick transition also to match his sort of tension. He's a bit unsuspecting of what he's going to encounter. And whether this nightmare is sort of real or imagined. Well, it's imagined as the fading used on the sort of guitar that's on the soundtrack contrasts with the sort of heightened nightmare soundtrack. Also, when Rafa says "Estoy enamorado," the director uses a close-up technique to focus on Rafa's sad and also strong feelings, and really deeply emotional, feelings for Amaia. We identify with him also, and whereas with the back shot of Amaia, we don't identify with her at first, whereas we do, and we're going to tend to with Rafa because we're seeing his face, we're seeing his emotions. Also, when Rafa is seen entering the bar where Amaia and her father are waiting for him, there's a medium shot to draw attention to the fact that he's changed his overall appearance. So if you notice sort of the shots that he used at certain points, I think that also enhance your analysis, and it's able to, just create an atmosphere and able to enhance the scene and what's happening and the themes that are going on. Also, to note, low angle shots are sometimes used in the film. So when the director uses this, it's usually to show someone with a sort of air of superiority. We see Rafa with admiration, and this is usually used towards Amaia's perspective. So yeah, that's also important. Also, vemos un partido de pelota vasca when entering into Argotia, which is a very important reference. Pelota vasca is a traditional game used with hands, like volleyball, when they use their knuckles to sort of hit this ball against the wall, a bit like squash. And it shows their sort of brutal nature, shows them as very strong. They've got very strong knuckles compared to Rafa, who will be dancing with flamenco, as we've seen in the early scene in Los Muelles. There's flamenco, so this contrasts with the sort of flamboyant nature of the civilians compared to the sort of brutal and very strong Basque people playing pelota vasca. Also, another important aspect of when Rafa enters the Basque Country, there's on the wall "Utzi pakeen euskal herreria," which means dejar en paz al País Vasco on the wall, and there's a real political message in that on this wall as soon as Rafa gets off the bus, and it shows this sort of political plea which is behind the film, that of leave us alone, let us be free. And the intentions of the film are really laid out there. They're not all murderers. They're not all trying to be separatists, and they're all just trying to really live their own lives, these Basque people, whereas Spanish society and the police are not making them out to be. So yeah, I think these are important, and I've got some other techniques that are used. Also, the start of the film is quite important. There's a real build up with quite an intense credit opening scene, and this matches the sort of lively atmosphere of Seville. So I would recommend paying attention to the cinematography used in the film to highlight and to enhance some of the scenes and characters. Right. So now I'm going to analyze el vestuario, so the dresses, and the costumes and the outfits that are used by characters. So firstly, as I've mentioned, el vestuario de Amaia es importante. The first scene, she's depicted in flamenco dress, and she's matched with that sort of outsider, very fed up to be in this scene and to be in these clothes, sort of setting and sort of atmosphere. If you compare this to Rafa and his friends, they're very sort of, as I said, flamboyant. They've got very stereotypically associated with Seville clothing, with their polos, with their sort of trousers and everything. So again, this is very important. They're basically representations of where they're from, through their clothing. Cuando Rafa entra en el restaurante, vestido como un joven vasco típico, so this is an important, very, very important scene in which Rafa trying to act like Anton, he has to become it, and through that, the clothing is able to do this. So he's got ropa oscura y holgada, un pendiente, el pelo revuelto, un pañuelo al cuello. La escena tiene un aire teatral. So it's very ironic. We're like looking on him, we're like, oh, that's very different. And this is very ironic, because he's trying so hard to become like Anton and how Amaia wants to sort of present him. And when changing him, he's really proud about his looks, Rafa. His appearance really matters to him. So when taking off his gomina, Anton's like, no, like, don't take this off, don't take this off. But she has to force it off of him. So she's able to do this. So los espectadores se ríen inmediatamente de su exagerado cambio de aspecto. And this is important. And also el flequillo, the sort of flequillo de Amaia, parece cortado con un hacha y que su ropa es sencilla sin forma. Los temas principalmente are like shown through this. And the vestuario was able to do this through Amaia. She's not wearing it here, but her fringe is what Rafa makes jokes of too. And this is sort of hurtful at first, but it becomes a running joke throughout the film that's able to bring out this love. So now I'm going to talk about some of the importance of the soundtrack and music in the film, and it's able to really enhance it, and the themes of the film, just like the cinematography. So an important one, as I've mentioned, is the start of the film. There's a really lively soundtrack, fast-paced music, which sets up the scene, blending Basque and Spanish identity. The sound of thunder and the sort of soundtrack when having the pesadilla is also important. Tells us that it was a bad idea for him to travel to the Basque country. That's what he really thinks, but in reality, it's not like that. And after experiencing this nightmare, Rafa realizes that it's really not too bad, and the soundtrack like shows this. When entering the unknown, it's really not as bad as what he'd originally sort of thought, and when encountering it. In the final scene, there's the singers of Macarena, Los del Rio, which you'll be able to see on the slides. My face is over at the moment. Who sing Macarena. Macarena, by the way, is an area, is a barrio in Seville, and you can go and visit. I really recommend. But Los del Rio is a band who sung the song, the Macarena song. And they also sing Sevilla tiene un color especial, which is played at the end of the film, and is also as a motif throughout the film. With Rafa's phone when ringing, playing Sevilla tiene un color especial. So music throughout the film is an important aspect of representing sort of defined culture and the regions. Also thinking about the south of Spain, it's very stereotypically attributed to flamenco. So there's a lot of castanets used in the original like bar scene. Also with the guitar, it's very flamboyant, very romantic. Cuando aparecen los créditos finales, se escucha la canción No te marches jamás. And it was made by El Aire, which is a duo from the Basque country. And the Basque group, which I really recommend, La Oreja de Van Gogh, is one of the singers, and also David Damaria, un cantante andaluz. So there's a mix. At the start of the film, it's really unclear of what sort of sound, like where the soundtrack is from, but at the end of the film, No te marches jamás is playing, and it's a mixture between a singer from the Basque country and also the Andalusian region. So this is interesting as it plays out on the mixing between the Andalusian and or Spanish and the Basque cultures through music. So now I'm going to very briefly talk about quotes in the film that you can use for analysis, and I recommend that you print these off, make some annotations, and really dive into the techniques that are used during these scenes. As I go through chronologically, las citas claves, the important quotes in the film. And I will just discuss briefly the context of each one. So, la encultura de esta gente, banda de vagos, que solamente os levantáis de la siesta para ir a jugar. So the context of this is when Amaia is in the bar and says this in front of all the Andalusians, very infuriatingly. The context of this quotation is following this scene when Joaquín says to Rafa after sleeping with Amaia for the first night in his house in Seville, dormir con un vasca es como tirarte 3 veces a una de Málaga. So sleeping with a Basque person is like sleeping with someone from Malaga 3 times. So this is very humorous and playing on the ideas of the real ridiculousness of encountering or sleeping with someone from the Basque country. So this shortly follows this quotation. Joaquín says que puede ser de la ETA o de algún comando. Esta gente con esto hacen cócteles Molotov en 0,2. And Joaquín says this shortly after reacting to Rafa showing him Amaia's bag when making breakfast for him, and Amaia has left her bag, and he's very fearful of what could be in the bag. It could be an explosive, it could be a bomb. And this plays on this ETA stereotype right from the start of the film. So this quotation shortly follows. ¿Tú estás seguro de que este bolso es de una mujer? Aquí no hay pintalabios, ni rímel, ni nada. And by the way, it's usually pintalabios, but the Spanish, the Andalusian accent, it should actually be nada without the D, but they'll get rid of pintalabios for lips. So questioning whether this this bag is of a woman, Curro reacts to the bag in the bar with Joaquin and Rafa, stereotypically associated with the fact that Basque women don't really care about their appearance. This is a very important quotation, which follows, that I've made reference to throughout this video. Es que me he enamorado. Again, he says it without the D, but I've just quoted it here like this. Saying I'm falling in love, with the primer plano shot that's used. He hides none of his emotions and he declares his love for her despite like sleeping with her for one night, as he's left his emotions on a plate. This quotation is actually very important too. Curro says, los vascos no pueden vernos a los andaluces, ni en pintura. And this quotation, after Rafa declares his love for Amaia, is repeated in the dream or the nightmare that Rafa has when on the bus, and this is what sort of filters into the dream. Los vascos no pueden vernos a los andaluces ni en pintura, and then there's a fade used to go into this. So the context of this quotation is when Curro says this about Rafa, after Rafa says that he would travel to the Basque country to see Amaia. He's known him from a young age, and he says that es incapaz de irse a los Vascongados. By the way, the Vascongados is a reference to the Basque country, but in a more military term, almost referring to it as Iran. And Iran is what some of the Joaquín Curro and the other camarero used to refer to the Basque country as a sort of a military place, which is independent. And yeah. This quotation of also reference, but basically he again references that he's love, hasta las trancas, he's head over heels in love. And this is when Rafa is on the bus to Argoitia and is talking to Merche. This is very humorous, and I'd really recommend remembering this quotation. It's a very humorous quote, which Rafa says, no tienes que seguir viviendo aquí. And he says this to Amaia, by the way, en las Vascongadas, yo te puedo sacar de aquí. So when Rafa arrives in Argoitia, which is Amaia's village, he goes straight to her house and enthusiastically introduces himself, thinking that she's going to be deeply in love with him, just as he is with her. Saying that he'll take her out from here. She no longer needs to be here. He can take her to Seville and all the problems will be solved. But in reality, she really likes where she is and she doesn't want to sort of stay, to leave. Sorry, she wants to stay. And this is a very, very ironic scene. It's very funny, and it pokes fun at the fact that Spanish people, or those not from the Basque country, especially those from the south, look onto the Basque countries, Las Vascongadas, as a place which is very militant and very dangerous. So this quotation follows immediately after the previous one, and he's basically saying, oh, I can take you away, te puedes peinar como una persona normal. You can dress and you can have hair like a normal person, whereas in the Basque country she looks ridiculous. And this is, again, playing on the stereotype of her looking ridiculous, making fun of her hairstyle, and again provoking a laugh in the audience, but offending her, as this is enough for her to kick him out of her house. This quotation is quite important. One, aita means padre or father in English, and is a Basque word that's used throughout the film, quite easy to pick up on. So Koldo says, Onaita tiene que estar ahí, pagar la boda de la hija. So he's very traditional. He's a very traditional Basque man, very traditional man in general, and he follows these sort of rules. And he's a very traditional man in the way that he do things. And in their sort of first interaction for years, for 6 years, in fact, Koldo suspects that she's going to get married to Anchon, and he says, no, I have to be here and I have to stay. And despite the fact that she's like, oh no, you don't have to stay, even though I haven't seen you for a long time, she sort of dismisses him staying. But in fact, he suspects her. No, I will stay. I want to be at your wedding. I want to pay for it, which is the reason why he stays. But in reality, obviously, it will crumble. So the context of this quotation, tienes el flaquillo que parece que te ha pagado un bocado un burro, is a joke. And Rafa says this to Amaia. When at this point, I would argue that the jokes are less funny or less disrespectful, sorry, but more funny in the fact that they're playing on this joke between both of them, saying, "Oh, if you could only come down to Seville and you can dress like a normal person." And it's more like a to and fro at this point, rather than I would argue than it being completely mocking. So he argues that her fringe, her hair looks like a goat has chewed it, which is obviously funny, as we can even as British audiences or viewers of A level also come understand this joke. You don't have to be Spanish to understand that her hairstyle is a bit different, but it's very Basque at the same time. Context of this quotation is when Koldo is in the bar with Rafa after going on the fishing trip to get bonito, which is cod, in Argoitia. And after Rafa says his 8 surnames to Koldo, Koldo says, me recuerda muchísimo el chaval ese con el saliste, uno que era del sur, sí, de Vitoria. So, ironically, he considers the south to be Vitoria, which is in the Basque Country, not of the south of Spain. And when saying this, there's a little pause when saying that he sort of recognizes and he reminds him of a man that Amaia, who was she's been with, was from the south. There's a pause, and we're like, oh no, maybe he's clocked on. But then he says, sí, de Vitoria. So it's very humorous there. So I've made reference to this, but Merche says esta mañana corazones, which is what Merche says to Amaia and Koldo as Rafa has jumped into her house to stay, and she says this reference, by the way, to Ane Igapiriturru, which is the famous TV presenter from the Basque Country, saying until tomorrow it is. So she's definitely a mother figure, and she's able to adopt this. This is what Merche says, and también dices la primera noche in response to Rafa saying that he'll never return after going to the restaurant with Amaia and Koldo. He's saying that he's going to go and he's never coming back. And every time that he tries to, Amaia, as I referenced before, she's able to come back and basically take him for the reason of love. And Merche has also experienced this as she fell in love with a man from the Basque Country too. This quotation, me vas a secuestrar, en plan manera de hablar, no en plan zulo, comes when Rafa is trying to leave and he's on the bus, leaving out of Argoitia. And he pokes a joke funnily at secuestrar being kidnapping, which is also a reference to the Basque Country and ETA. So reflects all the stereotypes, which isn't too funny, and it causes a bit of a discordant key, I would say, at this point. As he's like he sort of corroborates what he says. He says like, oh no, like I don't mean it like that. I just mean in general talk. So and afterwards they kiss and they make up. So this is an example of when a regional stereotype is used, but love is able to overcome this. This quotation is said by Merche to Koldo about Rafa and Amaia's relationship, and again proves her role as a mother figure. I've made reference to this quotation before in the presentation. Estoy a punto de convertirme en el nuevo líder andaluz de la calle borraca, which is what Rafa says before going on the sort of protest. in Argoitia with his friends from the prison, as well as Amaia and Koldo. It's a very humorous and very deeply offensive, and it could be quite problematic quotation, as it's a very new concept, having a new, like an Andalusian sort of Basque independentist. So this is a very funny case, and it's also quite troublesome and political too. The context of this quotation is during the Calle Borroca. Rafa says, Escauri tiene un color especial, which plays on Sevilla tiene un color especial, which is where he's from, which is a very famous song from where he's from, and is a song that's used throughout the film. And when Joaquín and Curro see the televised sort of protest on the TV when they're in their bar that they work in, they're shocked as they hear him sing this song, Escauri tiene un color especial, in this similar sort of way that they'd sing Sevilla tiene un color especial. So it plays on that trope too. This important quotation is in reference to the fact that Amaia's mum was with a Sevillano, was with someone from Seville, which is what Rafa says, se ve que eso va en los genes. The fact that after he learns that Amaia's mother's partner could be at the wedding, and her mother is with a man from Seville. He jokes with this with Amaia. It's almost this undeniable sort of destiny that the people in their family are going to be won over by those really romantic people from the south, from Seville. This quotation, eres un otero, I've referenced, but Amaia says this to Rafa immediately after making this previous joke about it being in the genes. And it's also flipped at the end of the film when Amaia arrives in the calesa, the carriage with horses, caballos, with Los del Rio singing. It's very corny. Corny being otero, by the way. And he says this, Rafa, at the end of the film, eres un otero, tía, in this instance. So her doing this flips this. Another very humorous moment of Koldo's is as Koldo says this quotation to Amaia as she speaks of the fact that Amaia's mum's partner may be coming to the wedding. And it's ironic because in fact Sevillano will be at the wedding, and that's the groom, Rafa himself. Si va a estar un sevillano en la boda, ¿cómo estás no voy a estar yo? As they try and get rid of him almost, saying that, oh no, you don't need to come to the wedding, it's fine. But in fact, a Sevillano will be at the wedding. This quotation comes immediately before the wedding, as Koldo and Amaia are entering, as he says that when, like, I know when you like someone, like, truthfully, and he can see it, and he can see that she's really in love, and this makes us question as an audience whether she really is, and I think if she was the one to answer, she would have married him at that altar, despite the fact that the priest is shocked on the sort of deception of the couple and Merche in front of Koldo, and Rafa being the very proud and religious man serving the Virgen de Macarena, the Virgen in general, being very truthful Catholic to his faith, as many Andalusians are, he leaves the wedding as he can't do it. But Koldo saying this creates all spanners in the work. So this quotation, which Joaquín says right at the end of the film, shows that it is clear that Rafa is now sad after leaving the wedding and not marrying Amaia. He's changed, and he's no longer the proud, egotistical, and inward-thinking civilian man that we saw at the start of the film. He's changed. His filosofía. Not only is his gomina different, his sort of his hair, not only his sort of appearance is different, but his manera de ver la vida, his filosofía has changed. So now we notice him more as a empathetic and less superficial man. This is my last quotation, which I'm going to make reference to. There are plenty more, but these are the ones that I've chosen in this video. So this comes right at the end of the film when Amaia says, "Creo que al final nos faltó un día." And this sort of confirms the fact that she says yes to him, not in the altar, but in La Calesa when she arrives, in a very corny way with Los del Rio playing. Yes. Vale. So we're now at the end of the video, and I hope you found that really useful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. Tell me what you thought about the film. And I hope this is a really useful resource because Ocho Apellidos Vascos, as you've probably seen, doesn't have many resources online, in fact, hardly any for A-level. So I hope that this is a very useful video, which goes through the themes, the context, the key quotes, and just thoughts generally. I recommend that you download the slides, add your own opinions, go through your teachers, and just yeah, do your own analysis. I've left some past exam questions here from AQA specifically, from 2018, 2018 specimen, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. And I recommend you do some essay planning, get some ideas down, look at the themes that these will cover, and just, yeah, also maybe thinking of other questions too that could be asked. So planning questions of themes, characters, ideas, and concepts that could be asked of you in the exam. I hope you've found this very useful. Ciao, adios, y again, I hope you found this very, very useful. Ciao.